Hey everyone, this is Eddie and welcome to this review of the performance test for the California bar exam that was administered in February of 2019. Now what we are going to do is I'm going to give you some tips, some strategies that I use, that I advocate. And if you have not gotten this free performance test ebook, you should get it. At the moment it is free. There's a link below. Now I'm going to start with the initial feedback by the examinees, and a lot of them said, look, this was a particularly extensive performance test. Why? Because the file was quite extensive in content. So the usual setup is they may have an extensive file and then the library will not be so extensive, and vice versa. But this time both the file and the library had a lot of content, and of course a lot of people ran out of time. Now I do advocate that for the afternoon session that you first engage the performance test, because if needed you can spend more than 90 minutes. You can tack on an extra 10 minutes, and I've explained that before. But a lot of people that followed this advice, they left the test room very happy, and I heard sad stories of people who did not do this, who did the first 2 one-hour essays and then went on to the performance test, and then they just ran out of time. But regardless, it's over. I hope everyone did great. What I do want to say about the performance test is that it's structured a lot like the one-hour essays. For example, you have Iraq. And you also here you have the additional component of a task, and you have major issues, you have major rules, and you have elements, and you also have to present counter arguments. Let me say that again, you have to present at least one solid counter argument. So you guys are going to see how I approach this, and hopefully it will help you. There are strategies here that I use all the time because the performance test is very standard. What I mean is that they employ many of the same components. It's like a blueprint. So if you're able to see the blueprint of the performance test, and then you're able to write better responses to these. Let's go ahead and start with the task. What do they want us to do here? And it was something about a bond not being exonerated, right? Okay, so that was pretty simple. Now what I say is first you identify the task, and then you move on to the major issues. And many times the major issues will be found in the memorandum. Other times they will not be found. They will be found in other parts of the file. Let's go to it now. Now I do want to say that if you found the major issues here from the get-go, I think you did great. If you did not find them from the get-go, I think that was still fine, but you might have spent a little bit more time. In other words, you could have saved time by quickly knowing what you're looking for. Let's just give the exam a plain look as we are now. This is what everybody saw. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and highlight the major issues. These are tips that will clue you in as to the presence of the major issues. Look, first and then second, they do that. Now I say look for maybe numeral numbers. Maybe they're indented, but this time they were not as apparent. Now what I say about the major issues is that you're looking for issues that are apparent, maybe not relevant, because you do not know at this point what is relevant, but if they seem to be apparent, and then you want to focus on them. And by identifying these major issues, you're able to get that structure. So you have the first issue there. What is it? Exoneration on statutory grounds. And then the second major issue is whether the court can exonerate the bond. Great structure there. Let's see how the major rules appeared. Now what I would say is scan the library and see where apparent rules are located, and here we found 2. Now I'm going to not go in order here, and I'm going to explain the strategy, because what I advocate is for the use of 3 readings. One of them is where you identify the major rules, which we did, and then the second reading is where you identify less apparent rules. And the third read, which I'll show you a picture of how it looks, what I'm looking for. This here is how I annotated the exam. So for the first read of the rules, the major rules, I just went ahead and highlighted, for example, exoneration there, Rule 13D, 1 and 2. And then I stopped, and then I went on to do a second read. Okay, now the key here for this exam, and if you got this, I think you did extremely well if you capture this rule. And if you did not capture the rule, but you still were able to discuss some of the facts that were relevant to this rule, I think you did well. And if you did not, then I hope you did a great analysis elsewhere. But this is something that repeats itself in the performance test, and it's very common, I would say, in at least the last 3 performance tests, where they'll have a key rule and key elements towards the end of the last page of the last case. And why is that? Because the bar examiners know that people are going to run out of time. They're going to start to panic, and they're not going to get to the last rule there. And if they do see it, they're not able to identify it as an element of a rule. And what do I say? I say, hey, look, when you see a fact of a case, see if you can convert it to an element or a rule. Now, sometimes these facts that can be converted into a rule are going to be confusing. And that was the situation here, because when I read this, I wrote down obstacle. I write down obstacle anytime the language is confusing. And why do I do that? Why do I focus on confusing language? It's because I know from experience, and it was true here, that wherever the language is convoluted, you're going to find possibly points there. And that was the situation here. Now, I do want to say this on the topic of it being confusing. You have to turn these facts into rules. And let's go to an example now. So here I have Rule 13D. So of course I have what I captured during the first read, and then I wrote here Rule 13 continues, and I turned that content into a rule. Pretty much it says that a bond will not be exonerated if there's a violation of the bond terms. And also it talks about the state being prejudiced. Now the facts here in the file were not on point with the elements of that particular ruling in the Weinberger case, and that's fine, because you still want to focus on that word prejudice. And for those of you who took this exam, you know that in the file there was an event where the state was prejudiced. Why? Because they could not identify the defendant, because he did not appear for his trial. So that was key there. And again, I do want to say that you do want at least one counter argument. So if you made an opposition to that, for example, if you made a rebuttal, okay, there's a counter argument here based on prejudice, that's fine. But I want to say that the first major issue and the first rules and elements there, they were not as straightforward as you would expect. Now, for the second major issue, everything was pretty straightforward. Let's go to that now. Let's see, the second major issue, it says that the facts do not justify the exercise of the court's discretion to exonerate the bond. And of course, there you had some elements. It was very apparent. And I think the rule stated something about good faith. So you have to make a colorable argument there. And I'm not going to discuss that in depth because, like I said, that was more straightforward. So that concludes this review. I hope this helps, and I hope that everyone watching this who took the exam passed. Until soon.